What's up, everybody? This is Mario, and I'm back with another episode of Endurify. And when I am talking to people and I tell them that I do triathlons and I do a lot of these different races, I always ask them, would you ever do a triathlon? And I get a lot of answers, and I get a lot of, I wouldn't do that because I'm not a swimmer, or I wouldn't do that because I'm not a runner, or I don't really like to bike that much. And really what I do is I listen for kind of these answers that people are saying, but really it also comes down to what people are not saying. And if I were to kind of just sum it up, it's really just that people are afraid to leave their comfort zones. And it's especially in a sport where triathlon, where you are judged and you have to go out and you have to train, and then it's a competition and there's spectators there and there's a group of people there that are watching you. And, comfort zones are something that we all deal with. And the reason why this is top of mind for me is because I've been reading The Brave Athlete. And chapter 9, which is the chapter that I just started, is titled, I Don't Like Leaving My Comfort Zone: How to Cross the Fear Barrier. And like I said, comfort zones are something that we all deal with. And recently for me, starting a podcast was something that really terrified me. It was something that was outside of my comfort zone. I had a lot of thoughts and a lot of fears, and I was afraid of things like, would I be good at it? Would people listen? Would people care? And what would people think of me when I told them that I started a podcast? And really what that comes down to, and to sum it all up, is, again, I was afraid of leaving my own comfort zone. My life was kind of defined as that husband, dad, manager at work, triathlete, all of those things that I was comfortable with. But when you introduce a new variable or a new kind of category of like podcaster, that's something that really made me nervous. And again, it's all because of comfort zones. And according to The Brave Athlete, they talk about how it's really just a fact of life that virtually all of us avoid certain activities that make us feel apprehensive about our ability to be successful and the potential failure that could happen, and the failure that other people will notice. But here's some other things that I'm learning from the book that were interesting to me. And with a lot of the athletes that they've worked with, what they noticed is these athletes are physically ready or have the ability to become ready to step up to the challenge in front of them, but they have chosen not to. So these are some athletes that are maybe thinking about going from a sprint distance to an Olympic, or a half Ironman distance to a full Ironman, or athletes that are really good that are thinking about turning pro. And again, what they notice is that these athletes are physically ready or have the ability to become ready to step up to the challenge like in front of them, but they have chosen not to. And that was really eye-opening to me. And so then what they started to do is they started to talk about the psychology of comfort zones. And I want to share some of that with you next. So when we think about an intimidating situation, the limbic system, or that chimp brain, sends signals to the frontal cortex, or the professor brain, that try to convince it of the physical and psychological risk. And even though that your brain kind of knows that death or physical harm is unlikely, it's heavily persuaded by the psychological damage that could occur. And 3 of the most common fears that people have are the following. It's humiliation, which is, will I look stupid doing this new thing? Embarrassment, am I doing it right or am I doing it wrong? And inadequacy, am I good enough? And it's really that limbic system and that ancient part of our brain that's really just trying to keep us alive. And it has served that evolutionary purpose over time, over millions of years of keeping us alive. But what the brain doesn't realize is that these situations that we're talking about of leaving our comfort zone most of the time our lives are not at risk. But these feelings are real. These feelings and fears of humiliation, embarrassment, and inadequacy, those are valid. And so in order to avoid those feelings, we create comfort zones. And comfort zones are kind of like a psychological fence that we create around ourselves to protect us from something we feel vulnerable about. So I'm using language from The Brave Athlete, but I want to reread that because I really like it. It's a comfort zone is the psychological fence that we create around ourselves to protect us from something we feel vulnerable about. And this fence or this comfort zone emerges as habits or actions that we take to avoid discomfort. And it's really just that adaptive response to keep inner peace. And so there isn't really like a zone. It's not like zone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you go through these different phases. It's just like a psychological creation that we have that presents itself as habits or actions that we create to help us avoid discomfort. But like the authors say, like, make no mistake about it, this is entirely imaginary and it's completely made up by you and I. And again, it's mainly there to protect us from something that we feel vulnerable about. And it's mainly there to protect us from your ego and my ego and our ego, which is those perceptions that you have about who you think you should be. So that's really powerful. And stop and think about that for a second, that a comfort zone is something that is completely made up by you in order to try and keep you safe from something that you feel vulnerable about. So that is pretty eye-opening. And what I want to get into next is, now that we understand a little bit about the situations where comfort zones present themselves and what the psychology is behind a comfort zone, I want to get into what are some kind of ground rules to help you start to shift your mindset to make you feel a little bit more comfortable with being uncomfortable. And then next we'll get into actual strategies. So these are 3 ground rules from The Brave Athlete to make you more comfortable with feeling uncomfortable. And the first one is this. Number 1, recognize that actions can fail, but people cannot. So actions can fail, but people like you and me cannot. And this is a big mistake that a lot of us make, which is we equate a failed plan with a failed person. And these are 2 very completely different things because, like they say, plans fail and actions fail, but people are not failures. Just because you or I maybe didn't do something as well as we would have liked to, that doesn't mean that we are failures. It just means that we failed in our execution and our actions failed and maybe our plans failed. And the critical point here is, what do we do with our failed actions and plans? Because this is an opportunity. Let's say that you signed up for a race and you started training and it just doesn't turn out the way that you maybe hoped or expected. Things are harder than you expect. It's harder for you to complete a bike workout, or it's harder for you to complete a running workout. How do you react to that? How do you react to the failed actions and plans? Do you learn from it or do you ignore it? And that's a super important concept to think about. And another thing that they share is, if the consequences are non-life threatening, then in almost all situations, the best option for your brain is to keep going, because that brain might be activated and might be trying to say, stop doing this, just to keep you alive. But the brain is just completely false, and it's making things up to try and keep you safe, when really what you need to do is you need to keep taking that action. Your life is not at risk. It's just trying to protect your ego. So the first thing there is to recognize that actions can fail, but people cannot. And the next step in helping make you more comfortable with feeling uncomfortable is to learn how to reframe your goals. And this is where you really want to focus your goals to be something that you are in control of. Okay? So when your goal is under your control, you always get to define what success and failure is on your own terms. And so one way to do that is not to set a goal based on a result, okay? Not to set a goal based on a specific time, but it's to set a goal based on the effort that you are going to give. So, this is not about setting a goal on the amount of time that it takes, where you finish, or maybe how others perceive you. It's all about defining a goal based on the effort that you are going to give. And one way that you can do this is just by taking kind of like a pledge with whatever it is that you're about to do. Maybe it's a race, maybe it's a meeting, maybe it's recording your own podcast. It's something like this. No matter what happens today or in this event or experience, I agree to give it everything I've got given the circumstances. So if you take that pledge, that's where you set a goal based on your effort, and that is 100% in your control. And no matter what you encounter, you can give it everything that you've got. And at the end of the day, regardless of the outcome, regardless of how uncomfortable you may feel in that moment or in that process, if you commit to that pledge, then you're in control and you're focusing on the things that you can control. So that's the second step, or the second option, is to learn to reframe your goals. And then the third one that they talk about was kind of interesting and surprising to me. So it's snap decisions are good for you, even if they turn out to be wrong. So when we think about committing or trying to decide to go after something that gives you some fear, gives you maybe a little bit of anxiety, gives you some discomfort, a lot of times if we let those fears and concerns linger long enough, we become paralyzed by fear. And so one of the solutions that they talk about is to just go ahead and make an impulsive decision about the future and decide right now. And the important part is in the future. This is a decision that you're not going to do right now. This is an impulsive decision and a commitment about something that you're going to do in the future. And it's important that it's in the future, because if you just commit and decide right now that you're going to do it, but it's sometime in the future, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, a year, then you actually have time to plan for it. And by planning for it, then you'll be able to prepare and set yourself up for success. So it's kind of that concept of just by quickly committing to a goal in advance, you overcome the decision anxiety, but you still have time to think about the careful execution. So that's the third kind of ground rule to help you be more comfortable with discomfort. And so just to recap those the three ground rules: one is recognize that actions can fail, but people cannot. Plans fail, actions fail, but people are not failures. And it's all about, how do you learn from those failures? The next one is learn to reframe your goals. And to do that, to focus on something that you are always in control of. And that can be something like your effort. And you can take that pledge that no matter what happens today, I agree to give it everything I've got given the circumstances. And then the third one, make a snap decision about something that you're going to do in the future. Overcome that decision anxiety, commit to it, set it up for the future, and give yourself time to execute that. So that's what I have for you today. That was just a little bit about what comfort zones are, what they are not, and some ground rules for making you more comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that's where I want to bring it back to you, because the authors talked about all of those athletes that they've worked with where they are physically ready to take on the challenge, but they're choosing not to. And I want to ask you this question of, is that you? Is that something where you're at right now? And what is it that you're physically ready and capable of doing right now that you're holding off or you're preventing from taking that first step because of fear? So write it down and maybe just commit to it right now and overcome that decision anxiety so that you can put a plan in place. Because what we're going to get into next and tomorrow is 5 steps for actually leaving your comfort zone, which I want to remind you is completely imaginary and it's completely made up by you. And it's something that you are doing to protect yourself from something that you feel vulnerable about. But that's what I have for you today. I hope that served you, and I hope you all have an amazing day.